All right, thanks for tuning in to the video today. I wanted to put together a little conversation, just kind of talking to you about why I didn't choose, of course, to become part of any group or camp, so have you, and why it's important, or why one must know that it's important not to associate yourself with these particular titles and so forth, and how it binds the soul and it causes you to have to deal with the agenda of the group. Keep watching. Okay, all right, thanks for tuning in. So, I've actually been studying and studying and studying and studying. And to tell you a little bit about my journey, of course, is I came into a level of awareness whenever I started looking into identity, because typically in certain communities, it starts with identity. You start to do the cookie cutter thing that surrounds you, and you want to find something more. You're looking into something more. So I have always known that if you want to solve any type of problem, you have to go to the beginning. And by researching the beginning, then you can find out the steps that you have taken in order to meet the destiny that you have laid out before you from that present time. So then I started studying ancient texts and so forth, and that led me to studying texts from Egypt, so to speak. And then I came across a brother's video, and he was mainly talking about the hidden identity of the so-called blacks in the Americas. And at the time, he went by the name Brother Yerushalayim. So I watched that video. I went and purchased the Bible. I had always known about the book, of course, but I hadn't had a strong interest in it, primarily because most of the ones that I knew who were doing that kind of thing, like religion, whether it be non-denomination, whether it be Jehovah's Witness, whether it be Christianity or the modern today's version of Christianity, whether it be any of those alphabet religions, I noticed that, they would be holier than thou in the midst of other people, but then when they are in their own domain, then they are doing that which is contrary to whatever it is that they're showing everybody else on a Sunday, so to speak, or on a Wednesday. So I kind of moved away from that, so to speak. I always knew that there was something about it. There was something definitely divine. I was having those experiences at an early age and everything. But I went and picked up a Bible, and I opened it up at Genesis. Now, of course, I have seen camps and so forth, and I have actually been interested at one time in potentially teaming up. And I think it's more of the camaraderie, because I've noticed that whenever someone comes into some understanding of something, they tend to want to be around those who are doing the same thing. But we are just like that. When you study us down at the molecular level, you'll notice that certain types of cells like grouping with other cells. And that's really what's happening. But on the physical plane, it's looked at like you have to be a part of something similar to a church, so to speak. And after studying several different groups and so forth, I just noticed that something was kind of off. I was noticing that they were operating similar to the churches that we are familiar with, like the Baptists and the Jehovah's and all that kind of stuff. And they were kind of like attacking other groups. And I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like it's something I want to be a part of, because I thought it was all about knowledge. I thought it was all about identity, land, and so forth. And then as I continued in my studies, I was looking at text from a different perspective that I knew that I wouldn't be able to do if I was associated with a group. Because typically when you're in a group, there might be things that you want to look into. There might be texts you want to investigate, so to speak, but you can't investigate it because you have to deal with the agenda of the group. And then the group typically has a doctrine set forth, and everybody who was underneath them have to follow in line with that. And if you do anything that's outside of that, then you're persecuted and so forth, and maybe called names and all that kind of stuff. That's what I've seen watching certain individuals and so forth. But I knew that there was other text that was out there, because the Bible is a very, very, very big piece of the puzzle. Okay. But it's all fragmented information, because we still have to know that someone translated it and then they gave you the goggles to look through. So even if you come into a revelation of something and the main thing that's been used is identity. So we're like, okay, wow, now we know what the people actually look like. They were written in a text. They actually look like what we look like and so forth. But what I've noticed is that all the attitudes, all the weight structures of doing things were still brought into the group, what you've learned from being in those previous churches. So it was like, keep all the sit down and don't speak unless you're spoken to. Keep all of that stuff, with this group thing that we got going on. So I noticed that there was something with that. So I just wanted to put together a video because I've noticed that there's been a lot of backlash against, so they're calling them so-called individualites, using scare tactics, obviously, to keep people in the group, because you're kind of dependent on the members, similar to an organization, similar to a church. And typically they have 501(c)(3)s and everything. So they actually need those particular members. Dues and things like that are associated with it. And I get that, you have to keep the lights on and so forth. But but it can't be a situation to where you're holding anyone back, because the Bible is like a guidebook for your soul. It's very encrypted, and you can't look at it from a Judeo-Christian mind. And really the only difference I've seen is that the names have just been changed. We're like, okay, well, now we're going to use some Hebrew, a so-called Hebrew, because when you look at that, that's a modernized authoritative Hebrew. It's not the original. So you swap out the names, right? You swap out the images. You're like, they didn't look like that. They look like this, right? And judgment to the nations, right? But when you actually look at it on another level, beneath the surface, beneath the dermis, you'll see that it's an astronomical book, right? You got to know that. So in that book, in the book of the law, for example, because in the writings accredited to Luke, accredited to Jesus, so to speak, who is basically the Son, not S-O-N, but S-U-N, right? You have the Adam Kadmon, right? So the writings that are accredited there talks about how all things must be fulfilled that are written in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms, right? Well, in the Psalms, it talks about ye being gods. And this is one of the things that I'm just giving you something to look at. So it says, isn't it written in your law that ye are gods, right? But then when you go to the Genesis and you see that there's a conflict that has taken place, and it says they have become like us. You see what I'm saying? And then there's a conflict there. So who is them that are saying they have become like us and are trying to prevent them from being that, and they cast them out of a place so they wouldn't take forth of something else that would give them that eternal life, so to speak. So we have to really look at stuff very closely. And it's very difficult to do that when you're in a group, because you got to deal with the agenda of the group. And then they chastise you for that. So that's one of the main reasons why I chose to not be a part of a group. Like, for example, in the book of Jeremiah, it mentions something about Marduk being confounded, right? And then you have to look and say, okay, well, who is Marduk? And then you're going all the way back to, the ancient so-called Sumerian, Akkadian time period where you're dealing with these particular beings that are known as the so-called Anunnaki, which means from heaven to earth came, right? And how on planet Nibiru, they were experiencing something and they needed to come to a place and they needed to get this gold, this particular mineral, so they can fix their atmosphere and so forth. And Marduk, according to this text, is the brother of who? So-called Thoth or Ningizida. You get what I'm saying? So it's very difficult to get that information. And Marduk's name was changed to Ra in Egypt. He was known as Ra in that particular land. So you wouldn't know that if you weren't looking into these texts, right? And then you see that there's actually a deluge story in the Sumerian text. So how would you be able to look into those things by being in a group? Like, for example, in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 18, it talks about how everyone was getting in a particular setting according to the genealogies of their fathers. And then it talks about the poles, right? And when you're dealing with poles, you're dealing with stars. You're dealing with star systems. Do you get what I'm saying? So also it talks about how in the writings, it also discusses how the Lord God is the sun, and it says S-U-N and shield. So you're dealing with an astronomical text that's very coded, and you wouldn't be able to get that with a Judeo-Christian mindset, which is what most people in groups have. So they've taken the same structures from the so-called churches, and church is an ancient word. It actually means circle. It actually means a disc, a circle. You're dealing with cosmology when you even say the word church. So you wouldn't know that by being in a group, because you have to deal with the agendas of the group. So that's the reason why I chose to be on this path of attainment. And of course, there's brothers, there's sisters, there's individuals, of course, who I do have discussions with, and we share information and so forth. And we don't have a title. You get what I'm saying? We don't have a title for ourselves, because that binds you to the world, because you're really associating yourself with worldly things. And it says be in the world, but don't be of it, right? So you shouldn't be chasing behind belonging to something that is actually worldly in a sense, because that binds your soul to it, and then your heart, right, becomes heavier than a feather. And you wouldn't even know what I'm talking about by being in a group, because you're not allowed to look into that stuff. In the text that has been placed into the Apocrypha in one of the Ezra's books, it talks about how when the texts were being written, and certain amount of the text had to go for everyone else, but then another part of the text had to be concealed from everyone, and it only had to be given to the wise of the population. And what that means is that you have gone through certain degrees. You have been on a path of attainment within. And I noticed that most of these groups are very exoteric. And when I say exoteric, that is dealing with that which is outside of you. They don't quite deal with within. For example, in the book of Leviticus, it talks about the certain types of foods that we're supposed to eat, right? And it talks about when it comes to that which walks upon the earth and everything like that, and how it has to part the hoof, be cloven-footed, and has the ability to chew the cud, right? So everyone knows that the so-called swine or the pig doesn't meet that qualification. However, no one has gone a step further to realize that there are certain ingredients that you find in things that is not a pork chop on your plate. Like, for example, Gatorade, for example, Powerade, for example, the soap that you rub on your skin, or the shampoo that you wash your hair with. You see what I'm saying? So you have ingredients like gelatin. You have ingredients like glycerin. You have ingredients like monodiglycerides. So you can be an advocate for keeping that dietary law. But if you don't know that about that which is within, and you are not going through the correct paths and degrees of attaining real knowledge, then there's going to be a way that seemeth right unto you, but the end thereof are the ways of death. And I watch certain videos of certain groups, and I see them drinking Gatorade. I see them drinking Powerade. I see the Coca-Cola sitting on the table. And, if you do your research, you'll know that Coca-Cola, or at least the version that's sold here in the so-called Americas. Now, I've been to the continent of Africa, and I've looked, and they don't have this ingredient there, but you have something like high fructose corn syrup, right? And when you're dealing with the pineal gland, for example, and the reason why I'm mentioning pineal gland is because Jacob, when he said he saw the face of God, and he named it what? Pineal, right? So when you consume something like high fructose corn syrup, there's a lot of damages that take place there. And then, like, for example, where's the advocate for making sure that you are using the correct toothpaste? Because the toothpaste that you might be using is going to have something called fluoride in there, and fluoride calcifies the pineal gland. Didn't Jacob say that he named it pineal when he saw the face? So certain knowledge and things of that nature, it's hard to attain that being in a group, because the group has agendas. They're against that group. They want to make sure they have more members. They care about likes and follows. They use that as currency, over other people. And I'm just not interested in that. So it's all about the knowledge for me. And I'm only sharing a little bit of what I've been able to attain. But I just wanted to put together this video. I have had people ask, hey, why aren't you a part of a group and so forth? I just haven't found, or I just have not been encouraged to join anything like that, because I have the understanding up until this point that it'll keep you very stagnant. It's very soap opera-ish when you look at the style of how they conduct themselves. And that's just something that I'm not interested in. If you are a part of a group and you are watching this video, in no shape or form is this an attack on you, I'm hoping through the words that you're hearing, that you're able to assess yourself and maybe make some adjustments, maybe make some changes for those who are out there who are similar to the path that I'm on and so forth. And really, it's about coming together, because all the information is fragmented anyway. So, there'll be a piece here, a piece there, that type of thing. So it's all about piecing it all together. So just remember that this is a guidebook for your soul. There's certain levels that you have to reach, and so forth. And you won't know that, like in the book, it talks about a worm, the worm being classified according to the civilization of deception as what? DNA. So, you got to look into that, because the Bible actually goes into it actually very detailed. And you wouldn't really know that when you're dealing with agendas. Okay. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do research on esoteric and exoteric information, as well as knowledge on spiritual mysteries. And if you got something out of this video, consider maybe leaving a comment if you have any questions or concerns. And I'll see you in the next video.